It is December the 13th. Christmas is just around the corner, and we're entering into that sort of final phase before Christmas, which is sort of the party and gift exchanging phase. Like there's that after Thanksgiving where you're buying gifts and you're really excited, and then now it's like there's people who are gathering together and sort of commitments and requirements, people wanting to get together, and that's that's sort of the time of year where a canceled plan is just like such a welcome thing. You're like, oh, they canceled. Yes, let's just stay home in our jammies and watch a Hallmark movie, right? Like that's kind of what everybody is but at the same time, like we want to get together, we want to gather together and see people and exchange gifts and those things. I wonder though. There's different sort of people have different sort of ideas and expectations and desires. And so I thought maybe this morning to start, I might poll you guys and find out kind of where you fall on, some of these axes. For instance, when you go to a party, a gathering, would you rather be, I guess we probably all like to be like perfectly dressed, not too dressy, and not underdressed, but there's always just sort of like this, it's kind of hard to hit the mark. I know as before I was married, I didn't realize that was an issue, that like being overdressed was a thing. And, if honestly, I don't think, before I got married, I don't know that I ever wore anything besides jeans and a t-shirt anywhere. Right, like I think that was just it. Like that was the extent of my wardrobe, was jeans and a t-shirt. And then afterwards I found out that I needed, shirts with buttons, that sort of thing. Shoes that maybe didn't have shoestrings. That sort of thing was like, part of what a man's wardrobe ought to contain. But so I wonder, if you had to choose between being overdressed or underdressed, which would you choose? If you would rather be overdressed, say overdressed. If you'd rather be underdressed, say underdressed. Okay, there we go. There's division. And I'm not doing this to cause division. Please don't get into a brawl in the parking lot over this. It's not that important. Would you rather, if you couldn't arrive precisely on time, would you rather be 15 minutes early or 15 minutes late? If you'd rather be early, say early. I don't think there's anybody that's going to say late. If you'd rather be late, my people, there we are. I knew I had a tribe here somewhere. Yeah, okay, so early or late, you're much more early than late. Would you rather give a gift and not receive one, or receive a gift and not give one? Because sometimes we have friendships and we don't know. It's like, are we exchanging gifts this year or are we not? So would you rather give a gift and not receive one, or receive a gift and not give one? Who would you say give a gift if you'd rather give and not receive? If you'd rather receive and not give, say it. Say receive. Nobody. Wow. So all of you, let's just be clear about this. All of you are okay with making someone else uncomfortable by giving them a gift and them having nothing to give you. Just want to put that back on y'all for a second. Anyway, live under the weight of that for a bit. Anyway, so how about this? Would you rather give someone a gift that you know that they have and use and love, but they already have one, or give a gift that they don't have and they might really love, but they also might hate? Would you rather give the gift they have or give a gift they don't have? Say it if you'd rather say have if you'd rather give the gift they have. Say don't have if you'd rather give the gift they don't have. Okay, very good. All right, let me see. Okay, one more. Let's say that you are out working in your lawn, and you're covered in grass and dirt and just filthy. Right? You're maybe not the dirtiest ever, like maybe not caked in mud. Just you've been mowing, and it's clear that you're, not ready for a party. And then you see that it's time. It's time. And you know that if you were to go inside and clean up, you're going to miss it. Would you rather go dirty or not at all? Dirty or not at all? If you'd rather go dirty, say dirty. If you'd rather not at all. All right. So there's no judgment here. There wasn't a right answer or wrong answer, other than maybe the one about giving somebody a gift and making them feel bad. Other than that, probably no wrong answers to this. But the thing is that I think when we think about relationships, because that's really the heart of this season. Heart of this season is first our relationship to God and the way He's connected with us. And I think that every other relationship that we celebrate during this season, it flows out of that. Or at least for Christians, it does. As a Christian, every relationship I have, it flows out from my relationship with God. I view people, friends, as a blessing from God. I view my children as a blessing from God, that He is the giver of all good things. And so if I cherish a relationship, I see that is from God, that He's the one who's brought that into my life. And so this season is all about those relationships. And as we have looked at our church and the way that we want our church to function, as the way that sort of, as I've mentioned before, sort of the things where it's like, if you could have every person in our church practice these things, one of the things that we want everyone to practice is to show up for each other. We want to be a group of people that show up for each other. We started this a couple of weeks ago when we said that we wanted our church to be a group of people that look up to the future. That in the future that we are looking up to see that good things are happening, that good things are coming, that God has done great things and greater things are yet to be done right here. Right? And so we want to be a people who are looking up. We also said that we want to be a people who are growing up in our faith. We want to be people who are growing up in our faith, and we think that there are certain practices, certain things that we do, reading our Bibles, prayer, Bible study, those things that they nudge us in the direction of spiritual growth. And we want to be a people who are growing up in our faith and encouraging other people to grow up in our faith. We also want to be a people who are showing up for each other. Now, there are countless instances in the Scripture of people showing up for each other. In fact, one of the things that I love about the Scriptures, especially the Old Testament, is how you see these events unfold so perfectly, that these events just fit into place like this amazing jigsaw puzzle, that because Esther was beautiful and because of the position that she had inside the king's court, that she was just perfectly placed to bring deliverance for her people, right? And it's just like, God did that, right? And she showed up for her people, and Daniel showed up for the people, and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego and the patriarchs, and all of these situations that God moves things so perfectly into place, and people show up for each other. This morning, I want to look at a passage of Scripture that is just one verse this morning that I think points us to how it is that we show up for each other. And understand, it can be difficult. Under the best of circumstances, it can be difficult to show up for each other. You find out that somebody's lost a loved one. And maybe they were expecting to lose the loved one for a long time. Or maybe you've gotten a call at 7:30 on a Thursday night that her husband died in a car wreck and that her daughter was in the car with him and they're both gone. And the last thing you want to do is to show up. And the thing that you want to do most in the world is to show up. You want to be there for that person, and at the same time, it's scary. I get it. It's tough under the best of circumstances. Now, you add to that this little global pandemic thing we're dealing with, and it makes showing up sometimes seemingly impossible. This week, we had a church member who was being taken to the hospital, and a year ago, if our church staff had heard that there's somebody in an ambulance on their way to the hospital, that's a no-brainer. It's not even a question. We get in the car and we go. In fact, as I look around this room, I think I'm counting 3 people that I've met at the emergency room, that I've beaten the ambulance there probably because Rusty was driving. Right? And we're there, right? But now we go to the hospital and we can't get in, or we go to a emergency care clinic and they won't let us see anybody. There's difficulties, yes. But whether we're in a global pandemic or back to life as normal, whatever it is, what our desire for our church is to show up for each other. So I'd like to look at this one verse of Scripture that I think captures part of the heart of this. It's Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. In fact, Romans chapter 12 talks, like, it is all about Christian life. Paul begins this chapter by talking about living as a living sacrifice, that we are to present ourselves as a living sacrifice before God, that we are holy and acceptable, that we're not to be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Like, he starts that way, and then he sort of talks about grace, and then a little later on in verse 9, he starts talking about the marks of a true Christian. And among the marks of a true Christian in Romans chapter 12, we have this verse 15, that seems like, hold on, not yet, Lori, that seems like the most obvious thing. It seems like the most obvious thing. It seems like it'd be the simplest thing in the world to do, and yet it can be very, very difficult. Romans 12:15 says this: rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. It seems like a very simple instruction. Seems like very simple instructions, except it's not as simple as all that. Probably the most famous example of someone who is suffering and weeping in the Bible is the book of Job. Right? Job's trials were epic. Like, they were incredible. Perhaps no one in the history of the world has suffered the way that Job did. And that was by design. Like, we see this heavenly perspective of Job's suffering from the beginning. We understand that this is a trial that he's going through, that God is in the midst of this, that he's allowing things to happen to Job, and that it's this test of Job's faith. And then we see his friends show up. And if you're reading this story for the first time, you see his friends show up, and you're like, thank you, man. At least he still has his friends there, right? His wife is already, her heart is checked out towards him. She's like, curse God and die. Like, she's got no more love or patience for Job. And his friends get there, and you're kind of like, oh, yes, his friends are there. And they sit with him, and you're like, yes, good. And then they start to criticize him. And you're thinking, man, I don't know which is worse, to have no friends or have these friends, right? Because these guys are they're picking his life apart. And they spend, not only do they pick his life apart, but they do it so eloquently. Like, they just have the most masterful vocabulary in the world to tell Job what a horrible person he must be. And you read that and you're like, good grief. Not enough all the suffering he's been through, but now even the people who are there with him, he's weeping. Why aren't they just weeping with him? Because it's hard. Because it's hard. And I want to talk real quick about sort of three things that make rejoicing with those who rejoice and weeping with those who weep so difficult. One is jealousy. One is jealousy. This applies more to the rejoicing end than the weeping end, right? More to the rejoicing end than the weeping end. But on the rejoicing end, sometimes it is hard to see people, even when we love them, for good things to happen to them. Right? There is sort of this just immediate kind of knee-jerk reaction that says, why not me? One of your coworkers gets a promotion, and you know they're good. They do a good job. Maybe you do a better job. Maybe not. But they get the promotion, and you want to be happy for them. And at the same time, there's this sense of self-interest that says, why not me? And we can say oh, no, that's not, I'm not that way. I try to push back. But if we're really honest about ourselves, that's inside of us. At some level, my hope is that the Lord has worked in your heart and your spirit so much that every sense of envy and jealousy and pride, that he has transformed you by the renewing of your mind, so that you say, oh, my last jealous thought was 25 years ago. I hope that that's where you are. But I'll just speak for myself and the people that I know really well and say, hey, you know what? That's not where we are. It's certainly not where we start. Where we start is we start at a place of self-interest and jealousy. But here, I want to run a little test this morning. I put a $20 bill under somebody's chair this morning. Thank you, Dax, for looking. Yes. No, that's real. I put money under somebody's chair this morning. It's not under your chair, sorry. But it was your $20. So good news, bad news. No, it wasn't. Your 20 still in my wallet. But yeah, so under somebody's chair is money. Yeah, you can all reach under there. Go ahead, it's fine. Reach under there. You'll feel it, or you won't, because none of you sat in the right chair. Front and center, guys. Front and center. Anyway, now if it had been under somebody's chair, like if it had been under your neighbor's chair, you might say, "Oh man, why wasn't that under my chair? It's under his chair. I saved that chair for him. He was off getting a third cup of coffee that he didn't need, and I saved that chair for him. Why does he get it and I don't?" And of course, you won't say that out loud, but it's there. Because we have in us this sense of jealousy. It's part of the human condition. But it's not part of the mark of a true Christian. It's not part of the mark of Christ. Like, we don't have a lot of stories about Jesus as a little boy, but I think we can imagine that if Jesus, saw his brothers excelling in school, that he would be happy for them. That if his father brought home a special toy that he made in the wood shop that afternoon and gave it to James, Jesus' little brother, that Jesus wouldn't be like, "Where's mine?" Because his character was refined. Our character is being refined. And part of the reason that we need to have a refined character, part of the reason that we need to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, is so that we don't experience this jealousy, so that we can show up for each other, so that we can rejoice with people who are rejoicing. A little later today, in like a few minutes, I've got a bag of oranges down here, and I'm going to give it to the Scallons, because she has gotten this amazing promotion for her new job, and they're going to Memphis, the armpit of Arkansas, and they're going to Memphis, and it's a great thing for them. And so I'm going to give them these oranges, and I want to rejoice with them. But I'm sad that they're leaving. I'm sad that they're going. Because even in something that we see as a good thing, it's really easy to let our thoughts be about ourselves. And we see someone else's joy, someone else's triumph, someone else's good news, and sometimes that feels like it's our loss, our bad news. But until our character is refined, until those marks of a true Christian come out in their truest colors, we push through it. We push through it and we say, we're going to choose to rejoice with those who are rejoicing, even when their rejoicing brings about some of our sorrow. We choose to rejoice with those who are rejoicing. I think the second thing that sometimes pushes us or keeps us from rejoicing with those who are rejoicing or weeping with those who are weeping is we assume that someone else will. We assume that someone else will. I started this section by talking about how a story where a random, Thursday night that someone's husband dies in a car accident and their little girl was in the car and they're both gone. And that's not a story that I made up. That's a story that I lived through. I was a youth pastor. In fact, the first church where I was ever a youth pastor, we had a man who was a teacher, and one night as he was driving home from work, he fell asleep at the wheel, went off the road into a culvert filled with water, and he and his 11-year-old daughter passed away. And I heard the news, and I was immediately saddened. He was a friend. His little girl, I've never seen a little girl who was so excited to be in the youth group next year. And, it was awful, heart-wrenching. And our pastor, we didn't have a pastor at the time, and I was the youth pastor. And there was a second there where I thought, the pastor will go. The pastor will take care of this. And then I realized there's not one. And so who else can I call? Who else can I call? There has to be somebody else that I can call. Well, her neighbors will be there, right? Doesn't she have some family somewhere near? Maybe a Sunday school teacher? I was looking for anyone else to go. Sometimes we get in that spot where we think somebody else will take care of it. That somebody else has maybe more of a responsibility. Somebody else has more of a relational connection to this person. She has better friends than me. You know, she has people who are more connected than I am. And so we don't. We assume that somebody else will. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't. Now, on that night, I'll just tell you, on that night, Haley and I were the first ones there, but we were far from the last ones there. Our church, everybody showed up. Everybody showed up, and on the first Sunday that she was back in church, as we were standing there and she was singing praises to God, people left their seats and they went and they stood by her. And they stood by her and they said, I want to stand by you as you're standing here praising a God that you see allowed your baby to go. I'm going to stand by you. That was hard. And everybody there who was standing next to her, who went to her house, we all had a thought that we wished that somebody else would do it, but there wasn't anyone else. There was us. As we look at the situation where we are, it'd be really easy to say somebody else will, but probably, maybe they won't. It'd be really easy to say somebody else will make that call, somebody else will make that visit, somebody else will do that thing, but maybe they won't. It may be that it's just you and me, and that if we don't show up, no one will. I think the third thing that I see is a difficulty that we have in showing up is that we're afraid of messing up. We're afraid of messing up. We are afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing when someone is rejoicing. We're afraid that we're going to say the wrong thing when someone is weeping. And I love the simplicity of what Paul instructs us to do here. What do you do with someone who is rejoicing? Rejoice. Yeah. He doesn't define the shape of your rejoicing. He doesn't say that it has to be this particular kind of rejoicing. He doesn't say that it has to be a song, it has to be a dance, it's just rejoice. I love how open-ended that is. That we can rejoice, and that's it. Just rejoice with those who are rejoicing. You don't have to rejoice exactly as they are. You don't have to celebrate exactly in the way they are, right? Because, all right, I'll be really specific here. Like, in our world, people celebrate different things differently. Like, the 4th of July this year was kind of a very different 4th of July, but next year, 4th of July will probably be, for some people, it's like, we're going to go and buy like $10 of fireworks. I'm going to let my kids pop them and then try to get them to sleep while all of my neighbors are going crazy, popping all kinds of fireworks. And some people will have these just massive bacchanalias, these just gigantic parties that'll involve a lot of activities that maybe you wouldn't want to participate in, right? Well, you don't have to rejoice in the exact same way that they're rejoicing, but you rejoice while they're rejoicing, so that we can be in this world and not have to be of this world. So we rejoice with those who are rejoicing. We rejoice. Paul doesn't say that you have to rejoice exactly as the world rejoices, just simply that you rejoice, that you find it in your heart to be happy for those around you who have reason to be happy. And we weep with those who are weeping. I shared this Wednesday night, I shared with our youth a story. I was in a motorcycle wreck several years ago, and I ended up I was wearing shorts. I know you should not wear shorts while riding a motorcycle. I didn't know any better then. And I was wearing shorts and ended up in this person's yard with the motorcycle laid over on my leg, and it melted the skin off of my calf. We've got a little while before lunch. You'll probably forget that image before it's time to eat. It was horrible. It was horrible. The burn was all the way down into the muscle tissue. Like it was bad, awful burn. And sometime later, I was sharing the experience of this burn with a young lady who was in my youth group. And anyway, I was just saying, yeah, I got burned. It was really bad. And she was like, oh, burns hurt. I was like, yeah, they really do. It really hurts a lot. Now, like my burn was like I had to scrape stuff off on a regular basis so that the skin could grow back, right? Like it was bad. And she was like, I remember one time I had some hot cocoa and it spilled out and it burned me right here. I was like, yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing. You and your hot cocoa burn and me getting second-degree burns and losing muscle mass in my calf. It's the same thing. Same thing. Right? Now, I didn't say that then, and I didn't criticize her then because you know what she was doing? She was trying to connect. She was trying to connect with me, and her as a 17-year-old had never been burned. Thank God. Like she had never been burned, but she recognized that I had been burned, and so she was trying to make connection there. It doesn't have to be that our connection is exactly the same. In fact, more than likely, in fact, here's what I sometimes see happen is, I'll tell the story. In fact, the night that I went to the hospital after the motorcycle accident, the night that I went, and I'm there on the thing, and the doctor who treated me, he pulled up his pant leg and he said, "You'll be all right. Look at this. Mine was way worse than that." I was like, can we not just focus on me for a little while? Okay, yeah. By the time they got the motorcycle off of you, the pipe was cold. Sorry, your motorcycle wreck was worse than mine, but I'm in pain right here, right now. We don't have to connect with people and our pain is worse than yours, and so we know what you're going through. Our connection doesn't have to be, oh, you have pain, I've been through pain too, and my pain is the same. It doesn't even have to be that. What we have to do is we have to weep with those who are weeping. Just have to weep with those that are weeping. It doesn't have to be that you can weep with someone who's lost their child even if you haven't lost a child. Right? Your pain doesn't have to be the same. You don't have to have gone through COVID to pray with someone who is suffering from it. You don't have to have gone through dialysis to pray with somebody who's going through dialysis. You don't have to. Your pain doesn't have to be the same. All that it has to be is that you have to weep with those who are weeping. See, what Paul is pointing us to here is an important practice of empathy. Is of empathy, and just to understand what people are going through, to try to connect with people in the way that we can. Connect with them. I think maybe one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and maybe as I've read through the Christmas story this year, and I've read through it several times in the past few weeks, maybe one of my favorite aspects has really come to light is the story of the shepherds. The story of the shepherds, I just cannot wrap my mind around how perfectly God brings all of this together. And I think what I've always done is I've read the story of the manger and the shepherds and that night of Jesus' birth, and I've always read it from the perspective of the birth of Jesus and what that must have been like for Mary and Joseph. I guess maybe I've just sort of naturally associated with them the most. And the story from their perspective is that, and Joseph is going back to his hometown, back to the place of his family, and there's no room for them in the inn. This isn't a revelation to anybody. Hopefully you all know this part of the story. But I don't know if you've thought about it in this way, and that is that have you ever gone back to your hometown and not been welcomed? So that's what's happening here. Right? Joseph and Mary are going to his hometown. Where are his parents? Where are his aunts and uncles? Where are his cousins? Why is it that when they're looking for a place to stay in his hometown, that they're looking at the inn? Recently, Haley and I went and stayed at her grandmother, in the hometown of her grandmother, and we stayed at a hotel. You would have thought that I had slapped her grandmother when I told her that we were staying at a hotel. And we were like, no, there's just not room in your house for us and our circus. Like there's just not room here. It's not. She was like, well, this is your house as much as it is our house. You're welcome here. You should be here. And we were like, okay, listen, what if we just give you 2 kids? Right? Like, we'll just take 2 kids and we'll take 2. And she's like, okay, well, that's better. Right? Like, where is that for Joseph and Mary? Well, it's not there. There's no warm welcome for them because Joseph's marrying a woman who's pregnant. He's marrying a woman who's pregnant, and their community, they see great shame in that, and so the doors that ought to be open to them are not. And they go to an inn, and there's no room for them in the inn. And they go and stay in a barn. They go stay in, maybe a stable is more accurate. They go stay in this stable attached to the inn, and she gives birth to the baby, and they put him in a feeding trough or a manger. And I get it, like there's beautiful symbolism in that the place where animals go to be physically fed is where all the world will one day go to be spiritually nourished. All right, I get that, but I think maybe I'd missed something, and that is that in a nearby field there were shepherds keeping watch over their flocks by night. And they get an invitation to go to the party. They get an invitation to go to this birth. And the invitation is amazing. There's this host of, this heavenly host singing praises to God and telling them, listen, the one that everybody's been looking for, the one that he's being born right over here. He's being born right over here. In a nearby village, you can go and you can see. And they're dirty because they're shepherds. And so all day long they've been hanging out with sheep, which don't smell good. And these shepherds don't smell good. And they don't have the capacity, the ability to wash themselves adequately to go into town and to connect. They don't have that ability. They smell like sheep. They're dirty. They don't have any standing in the community. If they were even from that community, because the way shepherds work, they could have been from another town. They could have been from 10, 15, 20 miles away. They might have zero connection to that town. They were not connected there. And even if they were from there, the people who were watching the shepherd, they were the younger born sons. They were often poor, from poor families. These were not connected individuals. They would have had no right to be there for this birth. But instead of being born into a palace, the Son of God was born into a stable. Instead of being born into a palace where shepherds would have never dared to go, Jesus was born into a stable. Instead of being born and placed into a crib made of gold, he was placed into a manger, into a place where shepherds that were familiar with it. He was in a room that smelled probably a lot like the shepherds did. See, when God showed up for us, he showed up in a way that we could understand. He showed up in a way that we could connect to. And when the shepherds showed up for Jesus, they rejoiced. They rejoiced with a woman who was rejoicing. I love the passage that says that Mary considered all of these things in her heart. She held them up like a precious treasure. I love that this group of shepherds on the outside of community who are dirty and lowly, that they gave the mother of the Son of God something to treasure in her heart. Isn't it amazing the way God works those things out? I think sometimes, I wonder sometimes, like before the shepherds left, what did they do? Did they, did they try to clean themselves up, make themselves presentable? Did they just go? Was there one guy that they left watching over the flock? I think there probably was. There's probably this one guy, there's like this one dude, Jonathan, and they come back and they're like, dude, we saw the Son of God. And he's like, yeah, I saw some sheep, but, I wonder, about those things. And I wonder what what doors God's opening for us right now. I wonder if, I don't think there's going to be a heavenly host open in the skies above you and say, there's a woman in your town who's giving birth to a son and she's not married. Go to her and celebrate with her. Skies aren't going to open and send you that message. But how about this? How about you take this as a message from God, that when we see a woman who is pregnant, that we celebrate with her. We rejoice with her. That we say, you know what? You may not really have time for this baby. You may not want this baby, but God is blessing you with a baby. We rejoice with you. There won't be heavens aren't going to open up to say, hey, your neighbor is lonely. Your neighbor is lonely and is desperate. And when your neighbor came over the other day with that lawn ornament and said, hey, is this yours because I found it in my lawn, that they knew that it wasn't yours. That was just them trying to make connection with you. That the sky's not going to open and say that. We have to be there. We just have to show up. The sky's not going to open up to say, listen, that person that you haven't seen in Sunday school for a while, they're hurting. Reach out to them. The sky's not going to open up for that. Instead, I'm going to tell you, show up for each other. Show up for each other. Because you'll be welcomed. You'll be treasured. Years from now, if you show up for people, imagine years from now, after COVID is a thing of the ancient, of our memories, it's long gone. It's a historical thing and not a present trouble. What stories are people going to tell? Because I can tell you this, like, there are people in our church who are going to tell stories of how other people in our church showed up for them. That, oh, she was there, she waited with me. Well, the ambulance came, and that the ambulance driver had to tell her she can't come. There would be people who tell the story, I got cards, and they meant so much to me as I was recovering. There are going to be a lot of stories told, and the stories that we want told about us are the stories of how we showed up for each other. So my hope, my prayer for our church is that as we are people who are looking up for the future, as we are growing up in our faith, I pray that we show up for each other. Let's pray together. Most gracious Heavenly Father, I thank you for today. And I thank you for all the ways that we show up for each other, the ways that people have shown up for me. Lord, I pray that you would help us to put aside the fears and the jealousy, to put aside the assumptions that someone else will show up. Help us to put those aside and to be present for each other, even in a time when we may not even be able to physically show up. Help us to show up in the ways that we can. Inspire us to send cards, to send emails, to make phone calls. Lead us to make visits through closed front doors and windows. Lord, help us to show up for each other. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. If you will, let's stand together. My call to you today is maybe you don't know that God showed up powerfully for you. And if that's where you are, I hope that today can be the beginning of faith for you. But I suspect that most of us have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that what we need is to recognize the power of that relationship to empower us to show up for other people. So if that's where you are this morning, I hope you'll take just a minute as we're singing, as we're praying, that you would ask the Lord to open your eyes for the ways that you can show up for people, that God would open doors for you to show up in people's lives.